So yesterday, there were updates on the Chicagoland Speedway. The Chicagoland Speedway, of course, not having hosted a NASCAR race since 2019. But in that time, since then, it's kind of become a cult following. And the news that came out, well, it wasn't very good. It was from JPET23 on Twitter, and it was pictures of the new plans for the Route 66 Business Park. Basically, a bunch of land around Chicagoland is for sale. And a lot of people right now are thinking, yep, this is it. We're finally putting Chicagoland Speedway in the coffin and burying it 6 feet under. And I think that that is a reasonable assessment, seeing how Chicagoland Speedway was on its death knell for a couple years before it closed down because of COVID. And I think that, it's not jumping the gun to think that Chicagoland Speedway is dead. Now, I am somebody who used to attend races at Chicagoland from 2007 all the way to the end in 2019. I was attending races for 13 straight years. I can tell you from someone who was at the track, the kind of atmosphere there was, and it definitely was a dying down kind of atmosphere. But I'm going to have the hopeless optimism of someone who went there, and I'm going to say, you know what? It ain't over till it's officially announced that it's over. Something about this plan that I want to point out is that there was no declaration that the Chicagoland Speedway itself had been sold. There was land that had been sold, but I will say right now that it is kind of like the 2020 land development designs that they had, aside from building over the track. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, back in 2020, during the shutdowns initially in the pandemic, some documents got leaked from the city of Joliet of a plan to build a lot of warehouses on the Chicagoland Speedway land, and a lot of it overlapped with about half of the track. Then a lot of people were thinking with it not having a race, it was dead. I will say this, it's not looking good. It isn't looking good whatsoever. There's only 2 job openings and they're part-time, both basis. But at the same time, at least they're having people work there. It would be a lot different if they were letting everything overgrow the way that a North Wilkesboro did, for instance. But I can say that from being at Chicagoland last summer, they're actually taking care of the track. It looks like it's ready for a race weekend. And when we went there, the one thing I did notice is that the gates were wide open and there were people driving around inside the track. Now, these probably weren't people doing anything for racing, but what I'm saying is it's being kept actually in relatively good condition. I'm not saying this means there's going to be a race, but rather that the track is not withering away the way that some people would like to say it is. I've been out there a few times actually in the last year, and it has not in any way looked like a track that is beyond repair. The only tell that you can have that there hasn't been really much activity racing-wise is the side of the track that usually doesn't have many workers on, has some little weeds growing in the pathway up to the speedway. That's about it. So I'm going to argue that it's not dead yet, and I again will acknowledge that I have blind optimism, and really I just don't want to be somebody who is homeless when it comes to having a hometown track. So one thing among a few things that I want to bring up is that this is very similar to Nashville Superspeedway. Now, I have been out at Nashville Superspeedway in the past year, and something that I noticed is that off of the backstretch, similar to the land that Chicagoland has, there is like a winding road around the track that people can drive around, get into the track, whatever, but right across the street, there's warehouses and industrial land that in no way impedes the usage of the racetrack. This is a track that had been closed for about 10 years before it was brought to the Cup schedule, and it really is similar to how Chicagoland Speedway was treated. Now, I don't think that at the same time there is as big a draw for racing in the Joliet, Illinois area. It really seemed like the last couple years that the locals in the area just sort of didn't care about the track. Back in the day, from about 2007 to, I'd even argue about 2015, there was tons of signs up when you would drive into Joliet, and there was tons of stuff everywhere in gas stations, stores, show cars everywhere, and that stuff really disappeared around 2016 when the track started to take a nosedive. So it's not exactly a one-to-one comparison with Nashville Superspeedway, but the similarities that it does have are actually pretty jarring. Also, these campgrounds, from my memory, were not sold out by any means. I remember taking runs through there in 2016 on the morning of a cup race, and it was lucky to be even half full, and it didn't get any better through 2019. So this land wasn't being used by NASCAR fans that much. Yes, there was campgrounds on the outside the backstretch, but the ones that were actually being sold were not on the land that was being sold around Chicagoland. This campground is basically a ghost town, and it was just a larger upkeep cost for NASCAR. So if they ever do go back there, selling off that land and not having to pay as much for it would be a major benefit in bringing Chicagoland back, seeing how ISC and NASCAR wouldn't have to really foot as much of the bill. Also, the plans from what it looked like are actually going around the racetrack. Now, that might just be because a racetrack is a giant ordeal to tear down, especially a 1.5 mile track like that. But it is interesting that they're selling land in that kind of shape that circles around what looks to be the backstretch of the track too. So that's something that, again, could lend to people having the theory of it being like Nashville Super Speedway. One thing I know says that Hillwood was one of the companies that was involved in selling this land. And if you remember, back in 2020, with the land development plans for not only Chicagoland, but many tracks, Hillwood was the company that NASCAR had hired to both build up the area and sell off any excess land they weren't going to use. I'm not saying that this means that Hillwood is going to build up a bunch of different restaurants and make this like Daytona. But what I'm saying is that this was part of the plan for a long time, and it was not part of a demolition plan. It was part of NASCAR's plan, similar to what would happen, for instance, at the Auto Club Speedway. Now, to be a little personal here, this track means a lot to me. I know the odds are very, very, very low that this track comes back. I know that it's a generic intermediate cookie cutter track with its only saving grace for originality being a curved backstretch. I get that. And I fully expect this track to stay closed down. But did we really expect Nashville Super Speedway to be on the 2021 schedule? No, we did not. Everyone had thought that that track was dead. That track was more overgrown than Chicagoland is. And yet we are racing there again this year and next year for sure. So I won't say it's exactly the end of the world until we see an actual announcement from NASCAR or ISC of the closure of Chicagoland Speedway. Like I said, from what I could tell, it seemed like they were keeping up with the outside of the track, at least from the land that they owned. The city-owned land around the track is very overgrown, at least towards the side where the tunnel in turns 3 and 4 is, but the land that's actually around the track looks really good. So I'm going to hold out hope. Again, I think it's like a 99% chance this track is getting demolished in the coming decade, but I'm going to hold out for that 1%. You know what? There has been crazier things we've seen happen at the NASCAR schedule. A couple years ago, no one ever had thought that COTA, for instance, would be on the Cup schedule. That track was one that a lot of people thought would be closed. A lot of people thought that Homestead would be closed, and that was picking up steam for a while, and that didn't happen. North Wilkesboro still might get resurrected. So it's not like this stuff isn't reversible by any means. With that, I'm going to pass this on to you. Do you think I have blind optimism, or do you think that maybe there's a shot? Let me know down in the comments below. And while you're at it, leave a like in this video, share this video, subscribe to my channel for more great NASCAR content. And to all my channel members, thank you so much for your support. So until next time, have a good one.